Welcome to Bonfire Conversations. I'm your host Hamid Reza Nikofar, and today my guest is an absolute legend in the world of music, Christopher Lennertz. If you've ever played Medal of Honor, Mass Effect, or the Godfather game, you've heard his incredible work. He's also mastermind behind the wild, grungy score of The Boys, and just scored Netflix's new hit Back in Action. In this episode, we dive into everything from his early days in game music to working with the legendary Michael Kamen, the heartbreak of Scalebound's Cancellation, and what's it like composing for both Hollywood and gaming world. And of course, we have some fun with my Penny for Your Thoughts segment where Christopher answers some truly wild questions. Before we begin, please consider subscribing, liking, and commenting on Bonfire Conversations. You can find the podcast on YouTube and all the major streaming platforms. This is my conversation with Christopher Lennertz.
Good to have you on the podcast, Christopher. You're truly one of the OGs of game music. And as a video game composer myself, I'm blown away when I look back at your career. And crazy thing is that I was only 12 when you scored Medal of Honor. And it's crazy.
You're a baby back then.
Yeah. So how did that era of your life come about? I mean, what sparked your journey into composing for games like Medal of Honor, Godfather, Mass Effect? I love them all.
Thank you.
So many more.
Well, I mean, I had, it's funny because I had, when I first got out of college, I went to USC and I studied with Elmer Bernstein, and I got out of college and worked for 4 years, almost 5 years, for Basil Polydoros, who did Conan and Red October and all these great epic scores. And I had been doing like horror. After that, I've been doing like horror movies for Roger Corman and just like really cheap slasher films and things like that. And I had done a lot of action music, and then also I did a documentary series called America that was on the Hallmark Channel that had a bunch of sort of big patriotic kind of orchestral music, and someone at my agents at the time had given my CDs, because it was CDs back then.
Yeah.
Give my CDs to the people at EA, and they were looking for somebody to take over for Michael, for Giacchino, on Medal of Honor, because the contract that he had said he wasn't allowed to do Call of Duty and Medal of Honor both because of the conflict, and his producers had gone to do Call of Duty. So he followed his producers, which of course he should. And so that opened up Medal of Honor, and they heard some of this music that I had done, and they were fans of Basil's and fans of also Michael Kamen, who I had worked with, who had just done Band of Brothers. So at the time, I think they just thought, oh, well, here's a guy who can do, epic, big orchestral music with melodies and themes. And, even though he's done a lot of slasher movies, let's give him a shot. And we did. And Steve Schnurr, thankfully, became a dear friend of mine, but Steve was the head of music at EA, and he and I got along great, and he introduced me to all the audio directors, and that led to, first it was EA. I did about 3 or 4 years of just EA games, and then after that I started doing, some stuff for Activision Blizzard and Sony and other things, but it really started with EA giving me a shot.
Wow. Were you a gamer back then?
I mean, the funny thing is I actually wasn't a gamer then. I was a gamer, well before then. I was a big Atari head back in the old days. And then I was to be completely honest, I was a hardcore like Dungeons and Dragons guy.
Awesome.
So I loved D&D and Narnia and all that stuff. And so I was really, I loved fantasy world and role playing, but not necessarily always electronic. A lot of times I was doing that, with dice. So it's funny that I kind of ended up at that time becoming a big video game guy, because I would mostly was more of the role playing guy. But I did love, I was a huge Atari fan. I had everything back then, and so then I got back in. Right when I got that job, I got back into games and really started, was just so amazed at the work that they were doing, and what we were able to do, really making everything sound like a movie. That was when things were changing, and it was no longer 8-bit electronic stuff. It was now able to be fully orchestral music, which was really great.
Wow. Speaking of games, one of the most painful cancellations I've seen was for the game you done, Scalebound. And I'm a huge fan of Platinum games, and I was so hyped for that game. As one of the composers on that project, I'm very curious, how did that project come together and sadly not come to fruition? And what was your approach to scoring? I'm still curious about that.
Well, I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't get to score all that much of it. I scored the big announcement. We recorded it, I think, at Sony, and we were all really, really excited about it. I could tell from the very beginning, I don't know a lot of the details, but I could tell from the very beginning that I think there wasn't agreement between Platinum and Microsoft in terms of what they wanted the game to be. And I think for about half a year to a year, we all tried to figure out a way if we could make a game that everybody wanted. And I think at the end of the day, Microsoft just said, well, that's the game that you want to make is not the game that we want to make. And I think Platinum said, well, then we don't want to do it. I think they're the ones who sort of backed down. I don't remember, but I wasn't privy to those conversations, but I did know that, there was just a distinct difference of opinion on what the game should end up being like. And I think at a certain point, they just said, we're not going to agree. And that's where they decided to just let it go, which is a shame because we had recorded some cool stuff, and we had written some really good thematic things that would have been fun.
Yeah, I'm sure. So what was it working with Japanese developers compared to Western studios? Did you just notice any major differences?
Well, the thing is I wasn't able to work with them very much. And I think that might have been some of the problem. Yeah, I think so much of what I was doing was being done through the U.S. publisher that I don't know. There wasn't a lot of interaction. So I never really got to get into it that far.
Yeah. Let's jump from games to movies, and one of your amazing collaborators and your mentor, as you've mentioned, Michael Kamen, and you mentioned Band of Brothers, of course. So let's talk about great Michael Kamen. I remember as a kid, I saw the S&M concert, and I thought that I want to create that kind of music.
Right?
And I think I'm still influenced by that legendary collaboration. So how did you meet Kamen, and what ways did he influence your work?
Well, I met Michael through a really dear friend of mine, Doreen Ringer-Ross, who at the time was the senior vice president of film music at BMI, which is my performing rights organization, and she was a dear friend, and she was very close with Michael. And Michael, mostly lived in London, but then had a place out here in LA, and he was doing 101 Dalmatians for Disney. And so he had called her and said, I need somebody to help me out and doing some transcriptions for my sketches. And so I went up and I met with him, and he hired me right away. And so I would go up to his house every day, this big mansion that was up in the valley. And I would take what he had done on piano, and I would transcribe it. So it was all in notation, and then that would get orchestrated from there. And I eventually, after not too long, I ended up becoming one of the orchestrators on that movie, and then ended up doing quite a few orchestrations for that, and learned a ton. It was my first time on a really big budget giant studio movie, and it was amazing to see Michael work He really, he and Basil both they write great melodies, and they wrote such visceral, epic music, and powerful, like either Sweet Music was amazing, and they put all their heart into the music. And that's I really think both of them were exemplary at that. And so I learned a lot about that. But the other thing that I did learn from Michael that was great is Michael was really great long before Hans. I will say, before Hans, there was Michael. When it came to like a composer who was really great at making directors and producers happy, and making sure that he took care of his clients, making sure that he told their stories and got excited about the process, got them excited about the process. So it was really helpful to me to watch the way he would work with the director of the movie and the producers from Disney, in the way that he would get them excited about different sounds and instruments and themes. And when they didn't like a cue, he would figure out what they were missing and how to make it work and how to rewrite it or tweak it to come back and become something that they were really excited about, in a way that politically was really great for me to see. It was a great lesson. It was probably a better lesson than any of the lessons I learned from him musically, which were many. But watching the way he worked in terms of keeping everybody excited about the score and happy with what's going on, he was really spectacular. And that's kind of what Hans is so good at today. So I really appreciate that I was able to be there and witness it. Cause I think that's one of the things that I do very well, in terms of called being a collaborator. And I definitely learned that from Michael. Absolutely.
Wow, amazing. And yeah, that's great, because music as a composer, of course, anyone can write music, but the strategy and collaborating and talking to the director and your collaborators, that's the key, and that's something that's coming from experience, and you got it from
the best.
Michael Kamen.
Right.
So unbelievable. Yeah. All right. So one of your recent exciting projects is The Boys and Gen V. From a composer standpoint, I was thinking about it, and it's like, from far, it's like, I don't know, that's easy. But when you really think about it, it's a very challenging project, given its thematic complexity, which is all over the place. But you nailed it. And the grungy, dirty, mean score is a perfect match for that word and for the characters. How did that project came about, and how did you approach it, scoring it?
Well, I mean, you're totally right. It feels like it should be easy.
Yeah. It's just a simple superhero.
Because it's noisy and messy. But it's actually really hard to do that and make it sound cool and purposeful and like direct, rather than have it just sound like a mess. It is tough to do that, and it's tough. It's a lot of production work, which is different than lots of orchestration or things like that. So it's a lot of work that has to do with the production of things. I got the show because my longtime friend and collaborator, Eric Kripke, who I did Supernatural with for 15 years, and we went to college together, and I did all his short films. We did Revolution together after Supernatural. He got this show, and he got it, off the ground and greenlit right at the same time that I was finishing up work on the movie Sausage Party, which was also for Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg. And so Seth and Evan and Eric were all in charge of The Boys. And so luckily it all happened at the same time. And so Eric said, I want to use Chris. And of course we had just finished up working together, and they said, well, great. That's all good for us. And so that's how that came about. And, but part of it is just, I did so many student films for Eric along the way that I kind of know what he likes and what he doesn't like. And I know what he means by different words and descriptions. And so I think it makes it easier for us to work together.
Yeah. And a lot of when I think about The Boys, like a lot of the feel of the music comes from like I forgot the main character's Jesus,
Butcher
Homelander
or
and
Homelander?
Butcher. Yeah, Homelander and Butcher. Yeah, it's kind of like all of these themes coming from these two characters. Am I right?
I mean, they're definitely that's the main world of the show. I mean, the show is I mean, Homelander is such. I mean, it might be one of the best characters ever created for television. Like, I feel like Homelander is like, it's like Tony Soprano. You know what I mean? But for superheroes, it's like superheroes Tony Soprano, because he's so flawed and he's got so much depth and idiosyncrasies and character to him that he's just so unique. So that makes it really interesting to write. So that's why it makes sense to have out of tune French horns with solo violin playing, exactly. Messy classical. Like, otherwise that doesn't make sense. And it's only because his mind is such a mess that it works. And Butcher is sort of the opposite, where it's like, it's all about the bass and the low drums and distortion and grit and his stuff. If Homelander's about a mess, it's a storm in his head, because of all his insecurities and narcissism, whereas Butcher is all about the gut. Everything's about the gut. It's all about bass and drums and low guitars and noise, and so I feel like it's sort of like visceral. Both of them are very visceral, and that makes it fun, because to watch those smash into each other is super cool.
Yeah, and in your music, obviously, we can hear that Homelander is always planning and being strategic about everything, but Butcher is like simultaneously living the moment and thinking and you can feel it in the music. Amazing.
Oh, good. Yeah, I hope so, because that's one of the ideas.
Yeah. So your recent score is for the Netflix hit Back in Action, starring Jamie Foxx and Cameron Diaz. I love spy movies and their music, of course. So how was it working on this project, and were you influenced by some of the classics of the genre?
Oh, yeah. It was great. I love spy movies, too. I mean, obviously, I did 2 James Bond video games because I love spy movies so much. And I'm such a huge Bond fan and such a big John Barry fan. That absolutely, I was very much, also, Henry Mancini and Lalo Schifrin. So all of those things came in my head when I was thinking about spy movies. But the interesting thing for me is I love all that classic spy stuff. But I also love the, modern intrigue of what was going on in this movie, which had a lot to do with, codes and data and hacking and all that kind of stuff. So what I really wanted to do is create, a score that was sort of a mixture of classic spy, thematic material and orchestral elements, and mix it with processing and electronics that there's a lot of, there's a lot of stuff that stutters and goes backwards and whooshes in, and all that's supposed to feel like the organic parts of the score are sort of mashing into the technological parts of the score, and hopefully bringing a lot of excitement. I got this movie obviously because, Seth Gordon, who directed it and co-wrote it, he also did Horrible Bosses and Identity Thief and Baywatch, which I did. And so he asked me to get involved early on. So I had read the script early. I knew it was going to be fun, and we both have kids. So I think we both thought it would be really fun to do a spy movie, but with like a family. And then it was interesting because I think, thank God Jamie's okay. But like Jamie, had a small stroke in the middle of the right towards the end of filming. And what that did when he was recovering, that gave us some time to play around with some of these things we were doing, like sampling and using, two stereo solo cellos on either side of the band. Using things like we did a lot of sampling of elements from the movie. So there's that desk in the beginning of the movie, and we sampled a wooden desk to make a lot of our percussion. We sampled motorcycle kickstands. We sampled, my kid and I went on a bridge, and because they did that big, that thing in London where, Jamie jump the motorcycle off the bridge. Like we sampled a bunch of percussion hitting the bridge with screwdrivers and hammers and mallets, and we incorporated all of that into our grooves and everything. And that was really, we were able to do that because we had a little extra time while we were waiting for Jamie and making sure that he felt better. And luckily it all worked out, and thankfully he's fine. And I do think that extra time gave us a chance to do some neat things and hopefully update the spy genre a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, Christopher, I've started this new segment in the podcast called Penny for Your Thoughts, where I ask some random questions to get to know you better.
Right.
So, are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm super ready.
Okay. So, first question. There is a biopic film about your life. Who would you like to be the composer for it?
Oh, man. Biopic about my life. And does it have to be somebody who's alive, or does it not matter?
No matter. Dead or alive.
Man. Trying to think of something. Like, I think I'd go Henry Mancini.
Oh my God, what a choice. Wow.
I think I'd go Henry Mancini. And because what I loved about Mancini, first, I'm Italian. I'm actually a dual citizen, and I'm obviously that, but I love all different kinds of music. And one of the things that I thought was just so spectacular about Henry Mancini is he would write these great melodies and translate them in all different kinds of music. And it would be big band, and it would be jazz, and it would be, pop, and it would have, and he'd write songs, and he'd write great lyrics, and he'd write, stuff. And that's really what I love to. I love to sort of play in all the different kinds of genres of music. So I think I'd have to say Henry Mancini.
Yeah. Funny thing that last week I told my girlfriend that I'm a huge fan of Pink Panther movies. Scored by Mancini, and I told my girlfriend, "Are you ready to go watch like all the Peter Sellers, Pink Panthers?" And we were seeing, I was like, "Listen to this music. This is the music for slapstick comedy, and it's magical. Oh my God,
it's unbelievable. It's so fun."
Yeah. So next question: you get to form a super group with any musicians, dead or alive. Who's in the band, and what kind of music do you play?
Wow, that's awesome. I think the band would be, let's see. Okay, so let's say...
What's the name of the band? You decide at the end.
Yeah, I'll decide that one at the end. But I would put, let's put Chick Corea on piano for a little bit of jazz. There'd have to be two guitar players, I think. And one would be Eddie Van Halen, and the other one would be Pat Metheny. So we'd have some jazz and some rock and roll. Wow. Drums. Oh man. Whew. I might have to go John Bonham from Led Zeppelin on drums.
Wow.
Which would be pretty great. Let's do, on bass. Ooh, on bass, we'll do, got to do Bootsy Collins. Bootsy Collins on bass, from Parliament. So we get a little bit of funk in there. And then on, I'd also add a brass section. So I'd get the brass section from Earth, Wind and Fire.
Yeah.
I'd have them in there as well. And then, it's just, that would probably be it. Trying to think if I've forgotten anybody. Then, on synths and keyboards, we'd have to maybe put my buddy Money Mark, who played on all the Beastie Boys albums, because he would add some real dirty, cool, like toys that he found at the junkyard, analog synths and stuff like that. So we'll put that on there as well.
That is epic. And what's the name of the band? What are we going to call him?
What are we going to call it? Oh man, maybe we call it I don't know, like Satanic Blender or something like that, because it's all those different kinds of music, and we'd sell a lot of records. I don't know, maybe not Satanic. Maybe we'll do let's do like something about bouillabaisse. Isn't that the stew where they put all the different kinds of stuff in one thing, like, or something? It's something where you put a lot of different kinds of styles of something in it, or sauce or something like that. Yeah, who does?
Satanic Blender is so badass. I love that.
Okay, we'll go with that one.
All right, going to the next one. We're going to the realm of aliens. All right, so if aliens landed tomorrow and demanded to hear best piece of music ever written, what would you play for them?
Ooh,
be careful, you gotta impress them.
I mean, ever written?
Yeah, in your opinion.
Yeah, well, I would have to play Gabriel's Oboe from The Mission.
Yeah. Oh my god.
My wife,
tears
it's my favorite, and we would play the version that Yo-Yo Ma plays on that, or Yo-Yo Ma album with many working on it. That my wife walked down the aisle at our wedding to that.
Oh, that is so beautiful.
Yeah. And that is gorgeous. So that piece makes me just want to sob every time I hear it. It's so beautiful.
God, yeah. Imagine they stepping down from their UFO and you're there with a stereo and like, listen to this.
They'd be like, wow, this is amazing. Right. We're not going to leave.
Yeah. Now, all right. So the same aliens, all right? Same aliens abducted you and demanded that you play one of your own scores to impress them. What do you play?
I think I'd probably go with Medal of Honor, European Assault, the Dogs of War theme.
Awesome. Yeah.
That's probably one of my favorite things I've ever written.
I see your strategy. You're trying to make them emotional, right? Yeah.
Exactly. It's heartfelt. It's trying to, that way they won't laser us like Homelander.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. So, all right. So what's the most ridiculous or unexpected sound you've ever used in a score?
Ooh, ridiculous or unexpected. Well,
I'm sure there are a lot in The Boys.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot of weird stuff in The Boys when it comes to unexpected.
You've mentioned some Back in Action.
Yeah, the interesting, The Boys is a fun one because one of the things that Eric Kripke said to us when we were first developing the sound was he's like, he loved the fact that on one side there were superheroes who had all the money and power, and he said, but the real heroes of the show are the regular people who have no powers and they have no supplies or money or anything. They just have to make do with whatever they have, and whether it works or not, and they got to make it work. And so when we first started recording, one of the things we really tried to do was figure out ways to make that come through with sound. And we wanted this big, there was this big, like crunching, crashing sound, as part of this cue in season 1, in episode 1, in the pilot. And and it was supposed to have this kind of sound to it. And so what we ended up doing to get it was we took the entire drawer at the studio we have a drawer that's filled with all of the silverware from the kitchen and all of the tools like hammer and screwdriver and wrenches. And we threw it all in a big bag, in a big like cloth bag. Wow. And so it was about 15, 20 pounds of just knives and forks and screwdrivers and whatever, bottles. And we put it all together, and we got up on top of a ladder and put a microphone right by the wooden floor of the studio and just dropped it. And it went like that. And then we took it and we added a lower octave and we added reverb, and it's ended up sounding like like that.
Amazing.
And so that was really what the kind of things we would do. And so that's super cool and unexpected, which I think is a lot of fun. And then I'm trying to think as far as weirdest, in Horrible Bosses, man, there were a lot of funny, weird sounds in there. And probably one of the more interesting ones was Money Mark had found, remember that, what was that game? Operation. It was an old game and used to use this little thing to try to like pull these bones out of this thing. And if you hit the sides, it would go and buzz.
Yeah, I know the game.
Remember that one? It was from 1980. And so he had this old beat up version of this that he had bought like at a junk sale. And when you hit it, instead of going like that, it would go and it would like fritz, and it was all beat up and broken because the wires were split. Yeah. And so we actually would hit the side of that in a rhythm that was like, and then would actually create this rhythm that would go along with the sneaky sections of some of these cues and Horrible Bosses. And that was fun because it was basically just a board game that I think he bought for, 25 cents at a thrift store or a junk store or something like that. It was really cool.
Yeah. An unintentional synth. Yeah. All right.
Exactly.
Great. This is it, Christopher. Thank you so much. That was great. Amazing answers to these crazy questions.
I'm glad. Those are great questions. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you for all these years of amazing work in games, movies, TV series, everything. And your career is absolutely inspiring. And it was a pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you.
Awesome. You as well. And hope to hear some of your music someday.